Good afternoon, early afternoon here on the East Coast, and good morning to the rest of the US. Good afternoon to all of those listening around the world and joining us in the recording. Really appreciate you taking some time to join the 360 Suite team here to talk a little bit with an excellent customer. I am so excited today that we have got UCLA Health talking about how they've implemented a disaster recovery plan for their business objects landscape. And I want to bring my co-speakers up into this. Next slide. Get the next slide. Perfect. Right. So awesome. Today I am joined by Don Collins and Saajid Fazil. I want to give them a platform to share their story today. Of course, my name's Nathan Crook, Senior Director here with GB & Smith, over 13 years in business objects, and of course, over 4 years here at 360. And really looking forward to digging into some of the details about why would someone want to implement a disaster recovery plan, and then more importantly, how do we go about it? What are the details? What was the outcomes? All of those kinds of things, and give everybody in our audience a chance to ask questions. And speaking of which, next slide. We've got a number of ways to do this. So on your GoToWebinar control panel, that little piece on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a questions area that as we go along, we want to make this interactive. So we find that the best use of this is not to just tell you about what's going on, but for you to ask all your questions and get everything onto the table so that this is impactful and useful for you and your landscape. Of course, the recording has already started and will be sent as soon as it has been processed and we put the follow-up email out there. And then finally, we like to make sure that we're incrementally getting better at how we do these things and how people consume the information. So help us at the end. There's a really short survey. Just complete that and let us know how good of a job we did today. All right, so we've got, as I mentioned, Don and Saajid on the line. Gentlemen, why don't you introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about how you, or your roles there at UCLA, and how we came to be working together on this disaster recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Nathan. I'll give both Saajid and I an opportunity to give us a little more of a personal introduction. But the first thing I wanted to say is it's been a journey for us to really understand and implement disaster recovery at our organization. And it's been an even longer process as far as partnering with the 360 team. When we first started talking about disaster recovery, they were right there with us and, providing us guidance and direction in terms of how exactly are we going to go about this process. And, at that point, I'll get into this, but we weren't sure exactly how we were going to implement, whether we were going to leverage 360 technology. It soon became apparent that that was really the best option that we had. So let me do this first. What I'm going to do is really introduce you properly to our BI environment, and then, like I mentioned, I'll say a few words about myself and my background, and give Saajid the ability to do that too. And then we'll jump right in. So first of all, the BI environment here at UCLA, the BI administration team, we're responsible for overseeing the SAP BusinessObjects, Tableau, server, and also add-on components, including 360, which we use for BusinessObjects BI backup, as well as Key Insight. So just a few additional words about our business objects, because there's probably people on the line that are like, okay, well, what's your environment like? I mean, how big, how small, bigger than a bread box. So we are running a 3-node full service uniform cluster behind a load balancer, which means all the nodes are totally identical, just in case you're wondering. We're servicing about 1,500 plus users implementing Windows AD as our authentication. We're an Epic shop, which means if you're healthcare at all, you know what Epic is. And that means we're heavily using Crystal reports, some Webby reports. We have an Epic Oracle backend known as Clarity, as well as some data warehouse extracts using SQL Server. So we have a whole lot of projects and activity going on a regular basis. And in fact, it doesn't seem like, not a day goes by that we have a new initiative, a new data warehouse as well. So we have an add-on product called Infosol used for bursting to help us with report scheduling. And then, of course, we have the 360 Plus and 360 Eyes products. So some of you may be brand new to 360. For those of you who are familiar with it, this will be obvious to you. But 360 Plus is an excellent tool that we've used for a long time for just backup of SAP BusinessObjects content. It works beautifully as far as, hey, we accidentally just deleted something out of our environment. We need to restore it back. So we're running those backups on a regular basis. 360 Eyes is a great tool to perform what's often called BI on BI. That's really where you're doing reporting and analysis directly against the content and activity within your SAP BusinessObjects environment. That's a huge critical need for us. It always has been. It seems to just increase. People want to know about how we're using our SAP BusinessObjects environment. And so we're leveraging the 360 Eyes tools just regularly and discussing those with our broader team to figure out how we can best meet our needs of understanding our environment and what's going on with that environment. We also have Tableau Server. It's a 3-node full service uniform cluster, also behind a load balancer. We're servicing about 2,200 users and always growing. We've used live and extract as well as files-based connections for those familiar with Tableau. Those will be, common terms, but the bottom line is we have a whole lot of data being pushed or pulled into the Tableau environment in order to support the organization's efforts for visualization. And last but not least, we do have the cloud. So, for example, a big initiative we're working on now that I'm instrumental in spearheading is the use of Power BI throughout the organization. So Microsoft Power BI, a lot of you might be familiar with that. It's a direct competitor of Tableau, data visualization, and dashboarding. And all of that really is keeping us busy. In addition to that, we're also doing a lot of advanced data analytics initiatives. In fact, I think this year we have more initiatives than we ever have, at least in several years. So it's an exciting environment, and that gives you a feel for just kind of our BI environment and what's going on. All right, well, without further ado, I just wanted to just kind of give you just a little more insight into who I am, and Saajid, give him an opportunity as well, just more on a personal level. So I've been personally tinkering with technology ever since I got my first computer as a Christmas present at the age of 14. My parents did not see me come out of my room for days. And I began my official IT career when I was introduced to SQL and suddenly found myself in high demand writing ad hoc queries for healthcare directors while basically on site just doing training, software training. So that kind of got me into the world of data analytics. Fast forward, it's been about 20 years now. And during that time, I've worked with Crystal, SAP BusinessObjects, Tableau, and Power BI. And I still love coding. So with that, Saajid, just want to hand it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure, Don. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Saajid. So I'm currently a business objects, I should say business intelligence administrator at UCLA Health here in Los Angeles, California. So my main responsibilities as far as tasks is to manage and maintain the business objects, Tableau, and now Power BI environments. I started as a business objects developer working with various various applications like web intelligence, Crystal, IDT, UDT for universe development, and then into Tableau and dashboarding, Lumira, and all that fun stuff. Now been working with business objects for close to 7 years now. And in terms of this presentation, we are really excited to share the benefit of 360 to the 360 community, especially with with this critical project that we worked on, that is disaster recovery. So I'm really excited to share what we have here. Over to you, Don.
Excellent. Thanks, Sajid. Yeah, so I know you guys are probably champing at the bit to get into the actual topic. Let me just take a little time. I actually didn't properly introduce UCLA Health, and I'd like to do that now. So UCLA Center for Health Sciences is one of the largest health science centers in the country and encompasses nearly all of the university's patient care, clinical education, and research programs and facilities. So you might think UCLA, it's the academic institution, but we're actually on the healthcare side of the equation, which for all intents and purposes, we function pretty much like a healthcare organization, even though obviously we are affiliated with the academic institution. So real quickly, Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center is our main hospital. We are servicing more than 380,000 people each year from Los Angeles and around the world. We are internationally recognized. We also have UCLA Medical Center Santa Monica. So UCLA Medical Center Santa Monica, as you see here, it's been around since 1926. It also is an academic medical center, tradition of high quality and patient-oriented care. We love patient care, we love patient excellence, and then there's a myriad of other facilities that are part of our conglomerate. So you can see these listed here. Stuart and Linda Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital. There's a Mattel Children's Hospital, as well as a medical plaza and a medical group. And last but not least is all of these schools that are affiliated, the academic schools that are affiliated. So the School of Dentistry, David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, and also UCLA School of Nursing and Public Health. So most of these facilities are all situated right within West Los Angeles. So I walk by these buildings every day on my way to work. So that's essentially who we are in terms of who you're talking to. So let's get down to business here. Let's talk about, you might be on the phone wondering, like, what the heck is DR, right? So DR, or disaster recovery, I found this definition on the internet, and I think it really succinctly defines what disaster recovery is. So disaster recovery is a process to resume mission critical functions quickly and without major loss in revenues or business operations in the event of catastrophic failure. So that is pretty much what disaster recovery is. Now, there is a lot of science and art that goes beyond the broad topic of disaster recovery. I mean, some people devote their entire careers just to this topic, just to the field of disaster recovery. How do we keep our systems up and running, and how do we recover very quickly and even transparently from any kind of catastrophic disaster that might take place within our IT environment? So clearly we could spend the next three hours just talking about disaster recovery, its definition. But what I want to do is just highlight two key terms that really govern the whole idea of disaster recovery, and they are RTO and RPO. So RTO is recover time objective. I know that sounds really technical. It basically is just how soon should it take us to get back up online in the event that we've been brought down because of loss of our entire environment. In other words, how much downtime. That's what RTO really is about. And everyone wants to know that, right? So, hey, if your SAP environment was completely wiped out, how long would it take you guys to get, back up and have it completely restored? And then usually the next question is represented by this next term, which is RPO. RPO is recovery point objective. Again, sounds really highly technical, but it's basically, hey, how much data are we willing to lose Or another way of saying that is, how current should the backup be? What I mean is, let's say it takes you 4 hours or 2 hours or even 1 hour to come back online. Well, how did you come back online? Because your entire environment has been wiped out. Well, you probably came back online because there is some form of synchronization or backup that has preserved your data, the state of your environment. And the question becomes, is that old data? And if so, how old is it? So these principles actually become really, really important because, in a perfect world, everyone wants to recover from a disaster instantly and perfectly with no loss of data, of course, right? But as you might guess, with everything in the IT world, as well as everything in life, there are trade-offs. So there's really a spectrum of disaster recovery when we talk about it. The lowest end, or the far end, on one side is manual backup and recovery. This is just essentially, well, we're backing up our environment. So we're backing up our files, or we're backing up our databases. And so when disaster strikes, okay, well, we're going to grab the backup then. And now we got to go through the process of just restoring that backup, getting it back online. Oh, okay, we need this file backup too. We need to restore that as well. And then, put the parts together and make sure the rest of the details of your environment is back online as well. So as you might guess, RTO depends on the effort involved, right? Human error is also a factor when we talk about this. Right? So that's what I'm always nervous about personally, is the more manual activity that it takes place, the more chances that something will go wrong. And guess what? That really becomes critical when people are breathing down your neck saying, how long is it going to be until this environment gets back up, right? So that becomes a real critical factor. RPO as well. So how old is your backup, right? Is it a day old? Is it a week old? Maybe it's a month old. God forbid you don't have a backup, right? Because then you're really not talking about disaster recovery. You're just talking about disaster, right? But that's the manual process. It's basically the lowest level of disaster recovery, if you want to think about it that way. And that brings us to the far end of the other side of the spectrum, which is what I'm calling total environment failover. Now, this could go by many names, but the idea is that no matter what environment that you are trying to protect, you have a parallel environment for that system that you can basically switch over to at a moment's notice. So the idea is this kind of like 99% uptime, that no matter what happens to your environment, I mean, the entire, building could be taken out and no one notices because you have this other environment that's all ready to go, and it just kind of comes back online and no one even notices the difference. So theoretically, that would mean zero loss of data, right? And again, just returning to these terms, RTO is theoretically zero and RPO is theoretically zero as well. Another important concept that I just want to talk about before we dig into what this means to us, right, is disaster recovery assumes that your environment that you're using to recover into is off-site. So for example, if your backups are all restored within the same environment as the one that just went down, that's not going to do you much good. So it's just something to think about, right? We're really talking about an off-site environment that you can restore to, whether it's manual or a total failover type of strategy. So with that, Nathan, I think we'll just take an opportunity here to do our first poll on the webinar. You want to take that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love the metrics that you're bringing up here. This really is digging in and setting a good foundation. So from this, which DR strategy do you have in place? And there's already somebody in the 360 plus category. I like it. And, is it a manual backup and restore? Is it 99% uptime failover? 360 plus backup or other? And if your answer is other, take a moment to add your, what is the other into the questions scenario. Just enlighten us, give a little context to what the other might be. And we're still answering. Going to let a few more people get in on the poll here. We've kind of slowed down. There are 40% of you that are not paying attention to your screen. Come on, people, come on. I'm going to close this and share the results. All right, so which DR strategy do you have in place? Uh-oh, did we move past it?
I'm still showing the slide. Do I need to do anything on my part to show that, Nathan?
Gotcha. No, I think I might have double-clicked the button to where there we go. All right. So which DR strategy? We've got 8% who are doing this manually today, 33% that are 99% uptime failover, and 50% on of the people who responded are backup 360 plus, and 8% are other. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting statistic. It's pretty surprising to me in a good way, especially that 99% uptime failover. So that's a really strong percentage.
I'm interested in that one as well. So with regard to the uptime failover, this is your business objects landscape, right? That those of you who were answering. And I just had a question with regard to how many people were in the poll. That's a great question. I actually don't know. I could do a quick math. I think there were probably 17 or so people that answered, if my math is anywhere close to right. And those of you who are in the other category, if you wouldn't mind, put it in the questions area. I'm interested to see what the others are. But yeah, okay. Context for continuing. I'm gonna hide these and yeah, here we go. Give it back to you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, so when we started our journey really in disaster recovery, I guess it should be said that we always had some form of disaster recovery. And again, we're now dropping into the specific SAP BusinessObjects environment strategy for disaster recovery, which is really, really key, right? Because we might have DR throughout our organization, but the question really we're answering today is, yeah, well, what about your SAP BusinessObjects environment? So when we started this journey, we had what I'm calling the SAP approach. So this is really the default approach recommended by SAP. What I mean is if you do a search for disaster recovery for SAP BusinessObjects, you will eventually find a knowledge base article that describes this process. So it involves basically restoring a backup of the CMS. And I just want to kind of step back for a moment here. Everyone on the call may know this, but there might be people that don't. Your SAP BusinessObjects implementation under the hood basically consists of a database and then a whole bunch of files, just kind of reducing it down to its basic components, right? So the database is called the CMS. The files is called the FRS, or the file repository server. And so when you have to do a restore and backup, the SAP approach is, well, keep your CMS database backed up. That could be running on SQL Server or Oracle, or any of a myriad of things, of the options that SAP supports during installation. So keep that database backed up, and also then keep your file repository service backed up. Again, this is basically kind of a network share where your files are stored. If it's a real simple implementation, it might be right on the server itself, but in most it's a dedicated file share somewhere that you're pointing to. So you basically have those backed up, and then SAP walks you through. Their disaster recovery option is to walk you through the process of, okay, restore your CMS to a database somewhere. Okay, restore your file repository service to a network share somewhere. And then the process, it proceeds to, okay, now let's just reinstall your SAP environment from scratch. Now with disaster recovery, it's possible that server has been already built from scratch, but the bottom line is it has to be built. So you build that SAP environment from scratch. And then the fun begins. You have to basically proceed in what I call hacking the SAP CMS, which is basically you literally have to run some scripts directly against the CMS. And then you actually have to run through some functions within the server itself to rebuild basically your services and your nodes within the SAP environment. The reason for this is real simple. SAP is tightly coupled to the server it's running on. Like the CMS literally knows that server. So the problem is when you swap it out and you create a new server underneath that CMS, it gets really confused. So you got to go through this kind of process of kind of massaging and hacking the CMS and then rebuilding your nodes. And then if you've made any custom setting changes to the services themselves that run within your SAP environment, your Webby service, your Crystal service, your job servers, any of those must be manually re-implemented too within those services. So basically you do all that, you fire everything up, and then everything is good from that point forward. Right? So it is a doable approach. In fact, I had just rolled off a initiative with a client pertaining to their DR strategy and had done a complete write-up before starting with UCLA. And then UCLA said, hey, what are your thoughts on DR? We're starting this initiative. And I presented this out-of-box SAP default option. What's interesting is our team lead, Paba, had just presented the same option. And the response back from leadership was, that's not DR. So it was really interesting because it's like, of course it is DR because it is a method by which to recover from a disaster. But their point was that that's not automated enough for us. So at that point, we began exploring a whole bunch of options. I'm going to just mention one of the other options we explored and then discarded, and then talk about the 360 option that we settled on. So this option is, I'm simply calling it virtualization. You can call it 99% uptime, but it's really, I want to focus on the whole virtualization process. So with virtualization, I want you to imagine, first of all, that your SAP server is running on an actual virtual server. And that's not really hard to imagine these days. I would say most servers right now are running on virtual servers. But I also want you to imagine that if your virtual servers that are running SAP environment went down for any reason, clones of those services would just pop into existence in another location, and they would be pointing to identical CMS and FRS, and everything would just resume as normal. That's basically virtualization. Now, it's kind of the holy grail of disaster recovery, and if we're talking about SAP, this is why. If we go back to our previous option we were just talking about, the reason that you have to go through so much effort is because SAP does not recognize the server that has been basically swapped out. Let alone the CMS and the FRS and getting those restored and all that stuff. SAP is having a hard time with this virtual environment that it doesn't even know. It's like, where am I even installed on? But virtualization in this theoretical or not so theoretical approach takes care of that, because if your virtual image is a true clone, and I mean a true clone down to the IP address and the server that it's running on, then SAP thinks that it's running on the same image that it already has. So that means your CMS is current, provided that it's been kept to the moment, right? Because your CMS obviously has to be there. Your file repository service is current, and then your operating system itself, the actual image itself in this type of approach, is indistinguishable. So SAP just thinks it's running on the same box. So that's a really good approach. For various reasons, we said that's not going to quite work for us. And one of the big reasons is that our alternate data center has its own server names and IP addresses. And so that difference alone was enough to not allow, again, it's mainly an SAP problem. It wasn't enough to allow SAP to be strong in terms of recovering. And that's when we really began to explore the 360 option. So what I like about the 360 option is that really it's quite simple in its approach. We were already doing incremental backups of our SAP environment So the question just became, well, what if we just restored those to a parallel environment? The advantage is that we don't even care about the stuff at the CMS and FRS level, right? I don't care about the CMS database. I don't care about the file repository. If we simply have an independent environment that we're keeping in sync by just restoring content from our backups, then both environments are independent. We're basically replicating content all at the business objects level. Okay, and that was key too, because if you go back to the original SAP approach on the far left here, remember, if you have a clustered environment, multi-node, then all of your efforts are multiplied. Again, with virtualization, if you have that capability to just kind of pop new clones of your servers into existence, more power to you, but you still have this multiple node type of thing that you have to deal with. Oh my gosh, I have to restore multiple nodes. With the 360 plus approach, you just install that environment, and then from that point forward, there is no synchronization except at the cluster level. So whatever you restore, it automatically, SAP just kind of handles it and knows where to put everything. So with that, let's just do another poll before we proceed. Nathan?
Perfect. So, second poll of today is, in the event of your environment being destroyed by space aliens, which could happen, you've all seen the 4th of July go down in the movies, how long would it take for you to recover? Less than 6 hours, 1 to 2 days, more than a few days? We weren't successful or haven't been successful. Don't know. We've never tried to restore. So we've got a few people answering coming in. And we also had someone who was having audio troubles. If you could just quickly tell the very short version of why virtualization didn't work, he wanted to catch up.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's directed at me, right, Nathan?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, okay, so with virtualization, first of all, you need the technology in place to simply spin up an identical clone of the image that just went down. Now, that technology exists. That may or may not be a problem for your organization, depending on the level of sophistication and support for virtualization, right? So, but the more important thing is, if we are talking, and I think this is a really key point, we're not just talking about, oh, we had a problem with our virtual image. Well, we're just going to restore it from backup. We're not really talking about that. When we're talking about disaster recovery, and this was our scenario that we had to really work through, we're literally talking that the entire data center has been taken out. That's true disaster recovery. If we're just talking about restoring from backup and we have a problem with our operating system and we're like, oh, something got corrupted, let's just restore it. That's really more of a backup and recovery type scenario. So I'm kind of driving at this point here. True disaster recovery literally means that your data center that is housed within your building on the first, second, third floor is gone. Like the building has been wiped off the face of the planet, which means that you need an alternate offsite data center somewhere that you can restore to. Now, that could still mean in your scenario, hey, that's still no problem. You know, obviously you're assuming that your virtualization technology, you know, the hub of your virtualization technology is not in the same location. That's a key point to point out. But you might still not have a problem with that if you have a virtualization type of solution, because you're like, yeah, we're just going to pop it into existence over here in Indiana or Montana. Not a problem. It's literally going to be a spitting image. But where virtualization in that kind of approach becomes a challenge is that if you have a data center with its own naming conventions in terms of the server and any kind of level of specificity around the environment, and again, the rubber meets the road with SAP because the servers can't be the same name and they can't share the same IP addresses. which by the way is really, really common because there's usually some kind of communication between the data centers. And so if you have identically named things, that could be a problem. But that was the real key point for us, just to kind of put a nail on the head, is our alternate data center did not have this, hey, it looks exactly the same down to the server and IP address level. And again, with SAP, that becomes an issue. With other technologies, that might not be an issue. But with SAP, SAP's like, hey, you changed the server name on me, and I cease to function.
Yeah, pretty much.
Hopefully that's a good recap.
Yeah, no, that's a great.
Anyway.
That's a great.
Yeah, and that was our
recap.
Yeah, so that was our thought process, right? So we're just like, okay, maybe we could push it in this direction, but the way we're going with disaster recovery as an organization doesn't really well support this. SAP was kind of seen as the outlier, like, okay, it's pretty tightly coupled to its operating system. That's a little unusual for the other technologies that we're using with this environment, and just wasn't enough to try to kind of refactor our whole entire virtualization strategy to make that fit. So
you guys were really smart about the way you went about that as well, coming from an outside perspective, because I've had a lot of these conversations in the past, and it's a finer point that I think is not as widely known as it probably should be in terms of how do we get back. And to kind of wrap a bow around this question, we had over 70% of our people come back and answer. And so we've got 27% at less than 6 hours. You guys are in a good spot. 1 to 2 days, starting to take a little too long. More than a few days, that's going to be tough, depending on, I guess, the business. 0 weren't successful, so that's pretty awesome. And I guess 27% are down in the we've never tried, which is a more common answer than I think it probably should be. So you're not in bad company, but it's a pretty standard thing. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I'm going to hit on 2 different points before I hand over the demo to Saajid. Real briefly, we're going to talk about, I'm just going to show a diagram of kind of visualizing what we're talking about here as far as how do we actually implement a 360, a DR strategy using 360 plus. Then I'm going to briefly address some considerations, some things to think about. I think that might get people thinking about questions and answers. And then Saajid, I'll switch it over to you just to see, walk through how this is set up. So the diagram we're looking at now is our overall visualization of the DR strategy. So I just want to focus in here on the center, which is we have 2 basic business objects environments. These are the environments that are functioning independently. Okay, so this is in data center 1. This is in data center 2, completely off-site. And then on a daily basis, we just have incremental backups leveraging 360. So we're literally just grabbing any new content, backing it up, which was already part of our backup strategy. The only difference is that we're just then taking that backup and then we're restoring it to this parallel environment. In a nutshell, that's kind of it. Now, in the event of a disaster, what happens here is all at the load balancer. So the load balancer is pointing over here at one environment, and then the moment that this goes down, we have basically a manual process for just switching the load balancer over. We wanted to maintain that level of control and not have it just automatically trying to detect whether a disaster occurred. So it just switches over here, and this one is up and running. Now, there are a few caveats that I'll touch upon in the next screen, but that's it in a nutshell. Just in case you're wondering about all of these other things, the real-time replication you can ignore. This was just our databases are all being real-time replicated between the data centers. But with this approach, you don't really have to worry about database level or file level replication, because 360 is taking care of that for us. It's basically replicating content at the SAP BusinessObjects level. And last but not least, before we leave this slide, the important thing to realize is once you have actually switched over to the new environment and you're using that environment for disaster recovery, assuming that you're going to be within this environment for any period of time, what you basically do is reverse the process, right? So you then will start doing backups of that environment because it's going to start to change, right? And then restoring that to the original production environment. So those aren't running at the same time. It's once the switchover is made that you kind of reverse the streams, if you will, and then begin, backing up to this becomes basically your offline system at that point, at least within our world and our way of thinking. Okay, with that, let me just jump over to considerations, and I'm going to blow through these real quickly. First of all, just realize that your offline SAP environment has to be offline. And what I want to draw attention to are the job servers need to be turned off. The reason is, otherwise you'll be sending out schedules in duplicate because both environments will be up and running, and obviously you don't want that. So that's just kind of a call out. The surrounding environment, I'm thinking about your email service, your SMTP service, as well as your network shares. Those should be identical. Now, if your SMTP is not identical, ours wasn't, like in our other alternate thing, it was kind of named differently. That was fine. We just went in and tweaked the SAP server and updated that SMTP. But you want to be thinking about that. You want to be thinking about what outside the SAP environment has potentially changed that could impact our scheduling configuration. If there's anything that is, obviously you need to address that early on in your DR strategy process and think, is this a viable option for us? Now, the last two options I want to touch upon here are the real things that we had to work through. So next runtime, most of you may know that if you bring your job server is responsible for running schedules, right? We have tons of schedules running on a daily basis. If you turn off your job server for any period of time, what happens when you bring it back online is any of the schedules that haven't run that day, go ahead and kick off immediately. Now, that's a good thing, right? But let's say your job server is down for months because guess what? It's your offline DR environment, right? Well, the problem is if you just fire your job server back up, it will literally kick off all of your schedules, monthly, weekly, everything that hasn't run for 6 months suddenly begins to run and execute. And of course, that's a problem because these schedules have been faithfully and successfully running within your production environment up to just a moment ago, right? So what we did is we actually created a script that would simply correct that issue. It would just go into the schedules and say, hey, you are actually current. Don't worry about kicking off and trying to do any backlog work. And that script seems to have worked really, really well for us. And then there's, last but not least, there's the issue of deleted objects. So if you delete a report within your production environment, that report the deletion itself doesn't get restored, if that makes sense. Like you can't restore nothing, it's a good way to say that. So what happens is any deleted objects in your production environment don't get deleted in the DR environment. So you need a way of really handling that. Now, with deleted reports, that's a really rare occurrence for us. In fact, we just take our reports and we move them to an archive folder. I know there's a trash can recycle bin in SAP right now. We don't use it. We already had our own process in place. So we don't get a lot of deletions, but where this really, really hit us is schedule deletions. So it's really, really common in our practice to not necessarily delete schedules, but reschedule schedules. In other words, someone wants to update the schedule, right? This is really a common occurrence. Hey, we want to add a recipient. We want to remove a recipient, whatever. And when you do that in SAP, what SAP does is it actually deletes the old schedule and then creates a brand new one. Well, that becomes a problem because in backup and restore, what happens in DR is it's not able to recognize that those old schedules are now gone, but it is able to recognize the new schedules. So we were getting a proliferation of schedules within our DR environment. And to be honest, we kind of handled it in a partly manual, partly scripted way. But the ideal way to handle this that we just didn't get to this round is, again, just a script. And all it needs to do is compare QIDs within the environments and find out which ones are not matching within DR. And then you just do a cleanup of removing those schedules within that environment. So that's a solid approach. We are not quite there yet in terms of that final piece. We're expecting to revisit that in our new round. So with that, we have gone through, just to kind of get back to the poll real quick before I hand it over to Saajid, we actually have gone through a DR cutover. So we've literally validated our DR environment, and our expectation in practice is actually to do that on a relatively regular basis. So we're not wondering, like we're not within that 27% of going, well, we have a strategy and we hope it works type of a thing. All right, well, with that, Saajid, I just want to hand it over to you and give you a few minutes to look at the 360 configuration online.
Sure, Don. Thank you so much. Yeah, let me, I'm going to do a quick demo here. Just making sure everyone can see my screen.
Perfect, coming through.
Okay, Nathan. All right. Yeah, so Nathan, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm just going to run through the demo real fast, just to give us some spare some time for some questions. So basically, this is our 360 suite administration, which is the environment in which we have our backup and rollback tasks running right now. So just to give a quick overview on this, we actually initially tried to set it up in the older version, the older 360 version, which actually took a long time for backup and rollback tasks to complete. So that's when we reached out to 360 support, and they were really helpful, and they helped us get to this new version, the new UI, the 360 suite UI, in which we switched, and then now we have all our backup and rollback tasks running on this environment, which is taking almost half an hour on a consistent basis. So that is awesome. And just to recap on what Don said during his presentation, our primary and the disaster recovery environments are based on data centers. So that would be two different data centers located in different locations. So this 360 environment is running in our current production environment, and that's our 360 server. We have a dedicated 360 server that runs 360. So I'm going to quickly log in and show you guys what we have here. I might have to restart the session. There we go. So once we log in, we can select the CMS that we want to create our tasks. So again, I'm going to actually log into our current production business object CMS as an administrator. So once we are back in, we'll be in the production business objects environment. This might throw us out a little bit, although it says DR, but it's actually our cluster name, which is referring to our current production. And once we are in here, there is this option where we can go into tasks. In tasks, we have, these are the two main tasks that we are going to focus on today, the backup task and the rollback task. So starting off with the backup tasks. So what this basically does is it takes a snapshot of the current production environment and it backs it up so it can be ready for restore later. So as you can see here, there is a pending backup that is supposed to run or kick off today at 6 p.m. So we have our backup tasks running on a daily basis at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. And like I said, it finishes in about half an hour, which is awesome. So just to show you some settings on this, let me say update. By the way, these are all current production real-time environments. So I'm just going to show you what we have here. So these are the credentials, whichever that you want to plug in here. So we are currently in the production session right now. The frequency wise, like I said, it's running on a daily basis at 6 o'clock. And so we can select here which kind of objects that we want to back up here, like the access levels, business views, public folders, which contains all the reports, universes, connections, and so on. And then we have options to say if we want to include the inboxes or personal folders. And we can also click this option to exclude jobs. And in instance wise, we wanted as a history of instances, we wanted all our instances backed up and ready for restore, which was a request from our leadership that they wanted all those instances saved. And we can also set up notifications. We don't have any notifications right now, but there is an option where you can send an email to your group saying that the backup is complete. We have not used triggers, but that is definitely an option here. The triggers that we have in business objects environment can be utilized to create these backups. And the final tab is the confirmation, just to say that, these are the settings that we have. And then that will create the backup job, which will, like I said, will take a snapshot of the production environment. And these are the jobs that have completed successfully. So we have 73 jobs that have been running on a daily basis. At this point, we have it running once a day, but obviously our goal is to make it more frequent as possible, probably in an hourly or a half an hour basis, to make it more real time, to get a more real time snapshot of our environment. So that's all with the backup tasks. I'm going to quickly show you the rollback tasks. For that, I'll log into our disaster recovery disaster recovery environment. We have the rollback task in our disaster recovery environment. That's the 360 server. Quickly logging in here. So once we go to this environment, which is our current DR, we have a rollback task, which is kind of the similar, very similar to the backup task that we have. The settings are very similar. I'm just going to quickly run through. So again, in terms of the rollback task, the restore task, it's running daily as well. It runs at 9 o'clock. So we have a good chunk of, like a bracket of time to have the, the backup ready and for the restore to happen at 9 o'clock. So like I said, the backup runs in a half an hour. So 6:30, we are looking at 6:30 in which the backup will be complete. So by 9 o'clock, it will be ready for restore. Options are pretty much the same. This is a main point here, which you can focus on. So you are going to, in this case, we are replicating the environment from our current production, which was CCV3DR, which I showed earlier. We can also set up notifications. We can utilize events over here as well. And that's mostly on the rollback task. So it's very simple. 360 was really clean and sleek in terms of these jobs. So that was really helpful for us. And these are all the jobs that has finished, which are running on a daily basis at 9 o'clock. So yeah, that's mostly that we wanted to show in terms of the demo. So I'll switch over to Nathan, and we can give some time for some questions.
Awesome. Let me set this up. Perfect. I'll turn the task over. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Nathan. Yeah, I can see it clearly.
Hey, perfect. All right. So that was excellent, and I can tell you've been working around in there. You seem very familiar with the flow, and you mentioned about the legacy application versus the current web platform. That was a big change. Did other than performance, did you like the way the layout and everything was kind of modernized, and has it been helpful for you?
Yeah, Nathan, is that question directed to me?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Yeah. It was really, like I said, the main factor was that the time it took for the backup and restore tasks reduced very considerably. So that was a
Mhm.
big factor for us. We were kind of little, worried why it's taking that long when we use the
Sure.
old UI. So yeah, it worked out well for us.
I won't bore you with all the technicalities, but it was a very good reason why it was. But all that said, I wanted to take a second just because we've been focusing in on disaster recovery. And as you can see, moving content in this way, it also does promotion. So there's some really slick things around automating promotion of content that can be leveraged out of Plus as well. However, I wanted to mention that our clients leverage us for a lot more than just disaster recovery. In fact, we started in the area of security, so being able to document and manage security in a very straightforward manner that just simply isn't possible within business objects. And it grew from there because people basically said, these guys at 360, they know my pain and they've created a solution that fixes that. Well, I wonder if they can do this, that, and the other. And so ultimately, we've grown our solution set to be able to handle giving better upgrades and migrations, which is kind of related to the disaster recovery piece because a lot of that is managing content. Um, Impact analysis, metadata and impact analysis was a big topic that we've kind of touched on with Don there at the beginning, but that is an absolute necessity if you're managing any sort of scale within business objects. Quality assurance. So once you've done this, excuse me, this disaster recovery, it'd be kind of cool to kick off a process of testing your top 30 reports that go to the CEO, CFO, COO, or anybody of importance, the most important reports in your landscape to go, yep, the data is the same, the reports are functionally the same, the time it takes for them to run, all working well, and we can sign off that this was a successful move from one platform to the other. That's from a migration and upgrade standpoint to even a disaster recovery scenario. That one's I think one of the biggest areas where we can impact the end user from a business object standpoint, other than having the platform up and available. Lifecycle management, cost reduction. There's a huge potential for cost reduction. Just it's cost and it's time, because time is money, of course, and time is really a big asset that they won't create any more of it. I've tried, but the the ability to automate things and the ability to reduce the amount of time to accomplish things ultimately leads to the ability to either spend money in a smarter way or more valuable way, or even save it. Security, compliance, automation of operations and maintenance. This is a huge piece where a lot of our customers are finding ways to um, get the manual aspects of like you're talking about from a disaster recovery scenario and moving that over into things that are more day-to-day administrative tasks. And then self-service, enabling self-service in an organization is a topic that I hear, almost ad nauseum. Everybody kind of wants to have that holy grail of where people can really serve themselves. But if they don't have access to information, if they don't have a good data dictionary, if they don't have really well thought out descriptions of objects and descriptions of object names and things of that nature, uh, it can be tougher to get the buy-in. So just wanted to bring those about. If any of these are areas where you're thinking, wow, that kind of lines up with something that my IT director or CIO or whomever is trying to get us to go, those are areas where we can help. And so ultimately, we've got one last poll, and while I put this up, feel free to let us know if there's an area where we can bring some value to you and your organization. Um, as you can tell, our whole purpose here is to really make it easier to manage business objects. And that's from an executive level, an administrative level, or even an end user level. And so if we can do something to help with your world, of course, let us know there. So I want to bring us back into some questions real quick. And actually, we've come to the top of the hour, so I don't want to spend a ton of time in here. However, I promise what we don't get to, we will definitely follow up with you individually. So one of the things that popped into my head as we were walking through this, and kind of relates to some of the questions we got, is what was your tolerance in terms of disaster recovery from a data and a recovery perspective? Was it less than, or 24 hours, right? I need to be able to recover at least within the last 24 hours of data and change and all of that sort of business? Or was it less or more, or are you driving to get quicker in that? Don, Saajid, either of you.
Yeah, this is Don. So that's a good question, and actually, it's a topic that we spent quite a deal of time discussing in the process. We finally landed on, like, within a 12-hour, I forget the exact, but if you look at our backup and our restore, you can call it 24-hour if you want to. We chose that at this point in time that was acceptable. However, as we speak, we're contemplating on reducing that window even further by implementing just an additional. The nice thing is you just did implement additional backup and restore job, and then you're in business cutting that down. But right now we feel comfortable with that, and that was done consciously. Like, we literally thought through the process and said, well, we know we could get real time, zero loss of data if you want, but given the data and analytics platform where it sits in its overall, operations with the organization, do we feel comfortable with this at this point? And our answer at this point is yes, we do, but there's opportunity to reduce that window even further.
And that's a really smart way to go about it too, right? Deliver on something you can deliver, and even overachieve given time and resources, et cetera. I think that's how much of that was driven from the business?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have full insight into that, except that I can say with confidence that it was definitely driven from the top down, to say that, leadership says we feel comfortable with this. And we have a pretty highly connected, communicative environment. Like, we are in touch with business leadership throughout. So I'm sure that decision was driven by them as well.
Right, totally.
Yeah. And Don, just to add to that, in terms of how business, drove us towards this approach, I guess mainly we have a lot of analytics or data that's needed on a daily basis. So some reports, like some operations within UCLA hospitals are driven through previous day's data. So it was kind of an obligation for us to make sure we have at least the previous day's data when we recover the systems. So.
Yeah, that sounds like the proper process, right? You kind of got to get a sense of where your users are and what they really need, and then be able to drive backwards from a technology standpoint to support it. There's a number of these questions that are follow-ups here, like versions and somebody asking for that script. But I have to say that we have come up on my limit of time. I've actually got someone that needs a demo at the top of the hour, which we are already over. So I've got to wrap this up, but I want to say a big thank you very much to both of you for exhibiting your expertise and your experience and knowledge here for everybody to kind of consume. I also want to make sure to let everybody know, of course, we're going to follow up on your questions and give you personalized answers on there. And lastly, as you can see on the screen, if you are looking for a trial around any of this, feel free to reach out. You can find a ton of videos of other customers, et cetera, out on YouTube, as well as how-tos and just general information. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time.
You're welcome, Nathan. And just keep us in the loop for any of those questions that filter through you guys directly. We'd be happy to follow up with any of them.
Right on. I will definitely do that. Saajid, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Nathan. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see everyone next time. Thanks.